thank you. It's always an honor to preach God's word. And I was thinking back this morning as the band was singing, and one phrase just really struck me. Great is his faithfulness. He's never failed me yet. And that's something I can say. And I trust that's something you can say. Great is his faithfulness. We were already planning coming up here. Actually, we had a list, our granddaughter. Now, those of you who are grandparents understand this. It's all about the grandkids. And they know it. They know that Papa, that's what they call me, will do anything they ask. And, Michaela, our eldest, she graduated from elementary school, and, she's a very compliant child. She is. She just wants everybody to be okay. And, so she'll never really ask hardly anything. And then there's, of course, Natalie. And you can just see the wheels constantly turning. Can you believe this? You're not going to believe this. She is charging me room rent. She checks it every morning to make sure I've paid. And I said, she's got a good heart. And she's giving, they're raising money for Alpha Pregnancy Center. Wonderful organization. And, I can't believe it. She's got a lot of bills. I think she's raised like $200 already. And I know many of you have been hit up with her. Selling her bracelets, selling anything. She may have sold the house for all I know. Then, of course, there's Nora. Nora, since she is born, has done this little game with me. I'll talk to Michaela and say, Papa loves you, Michaela. Do you love Papa? Yes, Papa, I love you. I'll go to Natalie. Papa loves you, Natalie. Do you love Papa? Yes, Papa, I love you. Then I go to Nora. No, I'm sorry, this has been going on for 5 years now. Papa loves you, Nora. Do you love Papa? Not now, not ever. I keep trying, I really do. And she said, you can't trick me. You can't trick me, but it's fun. Well, anyways, the night before we were going to be coming up here, Andrew calls me up. He says, by the way, Dad, the second Sunday you're here is the 48th anniversary. Would you preach that Sunday? So I said, okay, but now we got to put it together. And he's doing the series, as you know, on questions Jesus asked. So I was looking it up, and I didn't even realize this till I looked it up. Do you know in the Gospels how many times Jesus asked questions? 339 times. That amazed me. 339 times he asked questions. Why so many questions? I remember Ian, we called him Ian Michael. He had to get away from our church to drop the middle name. And, but I remember Ian Michael when he was, about yay high. All the time he was asking questions. Can I share something? He drove me nuts. Just, why? Why? Well, I can sort of relate to it because I was the same way when I was a kid. Why? I always want to know, why is it this way? Who says? Well, Jesus is the master teacher. And he uses questions to stimulate the hearers. He sort of does a diagnostic. By the way, asking questions, and it's funny, the church Sally and I are part of, Thomas Road Baptist in Lynchburg. It's a church that actually started Liberty University, and it's on the same campus. And our pastor, Jonathan Falwell, he asks questions. Now, one of the dangers of asking questions, you never know what kind of answer you're going to get. And Pastor Jonathan, all the time, he'll ask the congregation, and there's between 9,000 and 10,000 people there on a Sunday. So, I'll see him. I said, when is he going to learn to quit asking questions? Because he asks questions, and either he gets a dead silence, or it's a wrong answer. So you got to be careful with your questions when you ask that. But Jesus did ask questions to those that were listening. And we learn about one of these in Matthew chapter 5. Now, usually when we think of Matthew 5, what comes to mind? I'm asking you a question. What comes to mind? Now, I'm going to give you a hint. It starts with a B. Matthew 5, 1 through 12. And this is the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus deals with 8 character qualities of how to be happy. How to live a life with purpose, happiness, and fulfillment. It's what you and I call the Beatitudes. That's where you find that word blessed. So you can replace that word blessed with happy or contented. Now it's interesting, after he goes through these things, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are those that mourn. Blessed are those that seek after righteousness. Blessed are those that are persecuted. Oh, that's a good one. And he goes through all these things. But then if you look, following that, in verse 13, he says, if you want to live a happy life, and you develop these character qualities, now what are you going to do with it? So let's look at verses 13 through 16. And he asks a question based upon 2 thoughts. He makes a statement. You are the salt of the earth. And a little further down, he says, you are the light of the world. So let's take those 2 thoughts, salt and light. Salt and light. Now, what comes to mind when you think that phrase? It's a pretty familiar phrase. You are the salt. What does it mean? You are the salt of the world. What is salt? Salt actually has a number of uses. As you look at salt, you can think of it as that salt is used for currency. Do you know that? Back in Bible times, the Roman soldiers were often paid in salt. And it was so valuable. It was also used as an aseptic. Now, salt cannot change corruption to incorruption, but basically it will stop further corruption. Now, most often, salt was used as a preservative. Before they had refrigeration, if you had meat, what did you do with it? You salted it. And that's preventing it from basically becoming more corrupted. So it wouldn't become spoiled. Now, you may not know this. In Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13, it tells us, salt was also used as a covenant, a seal. as you would make a covenant. A lot of times you can make a covenant between God and his people. And then to show the sincerity of this covenant, you would pour salt over the document. But this is the one I like. And whenever I think of this, I think of my dad. Salt is used for flavoring. The reason I think of my dad, when we would have pork chops or steak or something like this, you know how you get the little salt container? My dad really liked it salty. He would sometimes take the lid off the salt container and just pour it over. I mean, it was, so now instead of being brown like a steak, it's white. I mean, that's how much, but it adds flavor. Now, I think many of us as Christians over the last 30 years have misused that concept of salt. Usually when we think salt light, well, salt is the political influence of the church. Do you know that thinking is only done in North America? Nobody in the rest of this world thinks that way about salt. That we're salt. We got to stand up against it. And we're famous for what we're against. Everybody knows what we're against. We're against this. We're against that. And some things are rightly so. But what are we for? What are you really for? And I think if you study the context of the verse, it talks about salt. You are the salt of the world. But if the salt has lost its flavor, it is considered good for nothing and is rejected. So in the context of what Jesus is saying, we as Christians are influencers. Let me ask this question. Think about it. As a Christian, what kind of influence are you and I having on the world around us? Now, I think we probably all can agree on, we're living in a dark age. It's getting dark out there, isn't it? And the world is in a free fall. My favorite phrase is, the world has gone crazy. Have you noticed that? It is just gone crazy. Now, during the Dark Ages is considered the time period from 500 AD to 1500 AD. That's 1,000 years, a millennium. The influence of Christians in the world around them became particularly non-existent. Do you ever wonder where all these monasteries came from? Over on the top of the hill in the Mediterranean or down on some deserted island? Well, where they came from, the world was considered so bad and so dark that people just abandoned the world. They said, we're going to go up someplace to get away from it. And what they would do is they would say, well, we'll read our Bibles. Of course, they had to read in Latin. And we will pray. Now, over time, it got so bad, eventually some of them even stopped talking. They're not talking to the world around them. They're not talking to each other. It's just silence. So what happened to the darkness? It continued. It continued for 1,000 years. I think a great statement can be made. It continued because those that were Christians refused to become salt in the sense of flavoring and light to the world around them. I've talked to a number of Christians throughout the country over the last couple of years. And I'll tell you what bothers me. What bothers me is I see a recreation of many Christians who want to retreat. We want to get away, just like they did in the Dark Ages. We don't want to live in a state where there's darkness. We say we want to go where there's already light. You know, if there's already light there, what do they need your light for? If they already got the flavor of darkness, what do they need yours for? And where are you going to run when that becomes darkness? Now, Sally and I live in Lynchburg, Virginia. Now, there's things I like about it. It is very much a quote, Christian area. There's 400 churches. Lynchburg is a city of 85,000 people. I've been asked, like when you lived in New York, did you have 400 churches? I said, I don't think so. We probably had 400 bars, but I don't think we had 400 churches. So there was darkness. But even in Lynchburg, Virginia, Forest High School, which is in the suburbs just outside of Lynchburg, it's where our son John lives with his family, they have a Satan club. Here's the point. Darkness is going to follow you. There's darkness everywhere. Wherever you are, you're going to have to deal with it. So what are we going to do? We're going to become salt influencers. We're going to become light. The late Dr. John Phillips, he was a professor at Moody Bible Institute. He's, quite honestly, he's my go-to theologian. I have his commentaries. I've heard him speak a few times over the years. My favorite Bible teacher, to be honest with you. Of this passage, Matthew 5:13 through 16, Dr. Phillips writes, we as followers of Christ are to be the medium or the influencers through which heaven exerts influence on the world. Just as salt preserves and adds flavor, we are to add a heavenly flavor to the world around us. When you and I go to a place, what do they hear from our mouths? Pastor I worked with in Green Bay, Wisconsin, when I was a youth pastor, he had this little saying. He said, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, looks like a duck, must be a duck. When you and I go into a restaurant, from what comes out of our mouth, what flavor comes out of our speech and our actions to those around us? When they see us and what they hear and what they see and what they do, are they going to say, there goes a follower of Christ? Or are they going to say, they're just like everybody else? You see, as a Christian, I don't know if you figured this out, but when it comes to your reputation in the world, you can't win. You can't win. You live the Christian life, then you're the goody-goody. Oh, you're one of those goody-goody Christians. If you act like they act and say what they say, well, he's a hypocrite. So you just choose what you want to be called. I'll take the goody-goody. Before he was president of the United States, Woodrow Wilson was the president of Princeton University. In that capacity, he was attending a conference in Chicago. And as he was there in Chicago, he decided, I need to get a haircut. So he walked into a barber shop to get a haircut. And he wrote of this experience later. I don't know how you have an experience in a barber shop, but he wrote of this. He says, as I walked in, there was a man already sitting in the barber chair next to me. And I felt a presence just from that man being there. I got into my barber's chair, and as he proceeded to cut my hair, the man next to me, he started speaking to me, and he spoke to the other barbers in the shop. And he spoke with such compassion and grace. He said, I felt as if I were in a sacred church service. The other man got his haircut, thanked the barber, paid for the barber, wished well of everyone, and walked out the door. And Wilson asked his barber, who was that man? There was a difference here that I've never experienced before. And the barber smiled and sort of laughed. And he said, well, that's the evangelist D.L. Moody. His speech was seasoned with grace. He added flavor, just even to a barber shop, just by his very presence. That's what we are to be. Wherever we are, when we're at work, when we're at school, when we're in our own homes, when we're talking to our neighbors, wherever we are, we're to add the flavor of the gospel by our very presence. Now, Jesus adds a warning. He says, when the salt has lost its flavor, it's rejected as good for nothing and cast aside. When we as Christians are not having godly flavor in our speech and in our actions, and we lose our influence to the world around us. Ian and Andrew have talked of 48 years. You know, I was thinking this morning, it's hard to even imagine. 48 years. And I thought, it's good that the church has lasted 48 years, but how in the world did I get so old? My wife asks me that question sometimes. This year we'll celebrate our 50th anniversary, and she'll say, how do we get so old? My answer to her is, we didn't die. Sunrise so far has lasted 48 years. How has it lasted 48 years? We didn't die. That's going to be the key. Don't die. A lot of churches are dead. They just don't know it yet. They got enough money in the bank, they can last another 5, 10, maybe 20 years. But eventually the funeral's going to be held. We need to continue to ask this question. My favorite question. What's next? Not what we did. What's next? What are we going to do to add flavor to the community? What are we going to do to add flavor to the world around us? I think of, and Andrew told me of how that your partnership with Mohansen and now with Shellnut to provide snacks and food for the kids. You know, we tried for 20 years to do something like that and just got door closed after closed after closed. I remember a few years before, I finished my time here, Jefferson, we wanted to do something for the teachers. And so most teachers have to provide some things out of their own pocket. And so I went to the principal over at Jefferson at that time and said, we would like to give gift cards. There's a place in Latham for homeschoolers and for teachers to buy supplies. I said, we would like to give gift cards to the teachers. How many teachers do you got? And originally we were planning on giving $50 gift cards for them to buy supplies. And he says, well, you can't just do them. Pretty much we had to buy gift cards. If we were going to buy one, we had to buy one for every employee in the school. Because he said somebody might get upset. So instead of 50, it ended up being they all got $25 gift cards by the time we had to do it. But he also didn't think we could do this. And I said, you can do this. Talk to your lawyer. Talk to this school's lawyer. They'll tell you we can do this. So he called me up the next day and he says, you're right. You can do this. And so we did that, but they were kind of suspicious and, and the concept of separation of church and state. Has anybody ever read that in the Constitution? You know why you haven't? It's not there. Nowhere. And, but we weren't meeting their need, real need. 2 years later, do you remember in 2013 when this area got hit, basically the remnants of a hurricane, and there was flooding? Rotterdam Junction got flooded, Middleburg got flooded, Schoharie, basically all along the Schoharie. Little hamlets got wiped out. Well, we had made a connection the year before with an organization called Gleaning for the World. Gleaning for the World is a Christian relief organization. And I sort of had that in the back of my mind. When that happened, I called the president of Gleaning down in Virginia. I told him what was going up here, and I said, could you help us? And he says, yes. And in about 12 hours, they had loaded up a tractor trailer full of food, water, blankets, and cleaning supplies. And it was on its way here. In another 12 hours, a second tractor trailer was on its way here. And so we basically called everybody we knew, and we put a word out to them. Anybody have a truck, pickup truck, dump truck, whatever, and have that. Andrew knew somebody that had warehouse space, and we made contact to have warehouse space over in Glenville, and the tractor trailers arrived there, and then we do it. So I made some phone calls. I called FEMA, and they said, well, we're not ready. And I talked to the Salvation Army, and they said, well, we have no place to store. I talked to the Red Cross, and they said, well, we'll be doing that kind of stuff, but we're probably 3 weeks away from getting any stuff. So we said, what are we going to do? This stuff's arriving. And now it's arriving. And we said, well, we'll do it ourselves. And at that time, we had a couple of Rotterdam policemen. I think Bob Dufix here today. He was a Rotterdam cop at the time, a sergeant. Tom Colbert was the lieutenant. And Tom was in charge of disaster relief, basically getting in and out in Rotterdam. And I talked to Sally, and I then talked to Tom, and I told him what we had, and he says, tell me when you're coming in. I'll have the roads open for you. So the roads going in there, and we just had trucks after trucks after trucks going in there and delivering supplies. And then we took some stuff down to Schoharie. And did you ever notice that communities have personalities? They do. There's personalities for communities. And we took it to the Schoharie, and of course they were so thankful. But they even said, don't give it all to us. Middleburg needs help too. Take some to them. So we did, and now we're on the second, truckload of supplies. We're taking stuff down to Middleburg. And somebody mentioned of some out-of-the-way little hamlet outside of Cobleskill that got flooded. And they said, could you maybe take some stuff? So we loaded up some pickup trucks with supplies, got directions, and we drove over there to the firehouse. And I'll never forget this. The chief of the fire department in that little hamlet was a lady. And as we pulled in with water and blanket and cleaning supplies, she said to me, oh, thank God you're here. We were completely out of everything. We didn't know what to do. We've been praying. This isn't a Christian organization, or, for all I know, I don't know, maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. She said, we were praying God would send somebody to help us. What were we doing? We were adding flavor. I've had people ask me, people outside the church, people inside the church, ask, why does Sunrise do, the humanitarian stuff? Why don't you just plant churches, give out Bibles, lead people to Christ? And I said, here's the reason. There's actually two. One is because we can. Over the 48 years, God has blessed us abundantly above all we ask or think. We've been able to do things. I have no, you see these buildings, they don't just happen by accident. These are God things. Somehow, we've raised, just in buildings alone, about $3 million. You get that? We're not a monster church. We're not a mega church. But we've raised $3 million just to build and pay off buildings, to do ministry. People have asked, why do you do it? I said, well, we never have done it for us. It's not about us. It isn't about you even now. It's about those yet to be reached. Reached locally and reached globally. Why is Sunrise, raised, well over 1.7 million, in addition to the 3 million for buildings, 1.7 million over the 48 years for global evangelism. Not just church planting, although we've done a lot of that, but we've also built 19 church buildings around the world, paid for it. We have built 2 orphanages, bought the land, put in buildings, put in medical clinics, helped hospitals, provided disaster relief to refugees in several countries around the world. Why do you do that stuff? And usually, we and our partners are there way before ever any government agency. Why? To be salt and light. To earn the right to be heard. Not only have we provided all that, we had Vernon Brewer from World Help here on the 50th anniversary or 40th anniversary of the church. And Vernon said at that time, right from the same pulpit, Sunrise has impacted either spiritually or physically 1 million people around the world. Not too shabby for a little local church in Rotterdam, New York, is it? It's not too shabby at all. When you are committed, and this is my prayer for you, to be salt, flavor, and also to be light. Can't hide it under the bushel. You got to put it on the lampstand for all the world to see. You know, when I think of light, I think of the moon. The moon has no light of its own. When you go out in the evening and you see enough of the moon's light that you actually can see what's going on in your backyard, it's because the moon is reflecting the sun. We are like the moon as Christians. We have no source of light in ourselves. If the world is going to see light, it's going to be a reflection of the sun, S-O-N, that's in us. Let's do that. Let's be salt. Let's be light. So let me give you 2 takeaways. Ask yourself this. What hinders or prevents Christians from fulfilling our role as salt and light to the world around us? You can think about that this afternoon. What's preventing me? I think it's going to come down to selfishness. I don't want to. Here's the second one. So what can we do? What can I do? What can Sunrise do? What's next? To be that flavor. To show the light to the world. It seems that the role of the Christian is salt and light. Many times it's because we choose to settle. Settle for the comfort of just having life about ourselves. God calls us for so much more. Add flavor. Add a beacon. Regardless of the darkness, show it to all. In Jesus' name, amen. Blessings, everyone.